Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining me from. My name is Barton Seaver. I'm a husband, father, chef, author, joining you from the ragged, jagged, delicious coast of Maine, where my family and I live on a wonderful little plot of Eden that we call our Seaver family farm, which is raging with abundance right now. So I actually have a bunch of questions for you today, which I'll get to in a minute. But thank you very much for joining. I really do appreciate it. For this open office hours, you can ask away and anything. It doesn't have to even be food related, but anything to the industry, whatever it is. You want to know about farming unicorns or dinosaurs, whatever it is. Hey, we welcome the questions, and I really appreciate you being a part of the Ruby family. For those of you who might not been a part of one of these events before, you'll see over to the right-hand side of your screen, there's the questions box. You can type in the question that you would like to ask there. Also, if there's a question in the queue that's particularly relevant or of interest to you, click that little heart icon to vote it up to the top to make sure that I get to it. I don't have much more than an hour with you today because some very exciting news. And well, I'll back up a second. Those of you who have joined me before know that I like to start off each of these events with a little moment of gratitude, because cooking for people is an act of kindness, it is an act of love, and we should be so grateful for the opportunity to express ourselves through food. And the best ingredient in any dish you can prepare is gratitude for it. So whenever you take or participate in cooking or a meal, I suggest you just take a moment to sit back and think about something you're grateful for. And something I am grateful for, peaches, too much zucchini, pears, way too many tomatoes, etc. But something I'm very grateful for is that my 6-year-old little guy, Alden, went to kindergarten yesterday for his very first day. And he was so brave. He was so good. He was so kind and strong. And he was so tired when he got home. And he's taking this very seriously. So we had, I'm just grateful for that opportunities to be a part of his life. It's just so awesome. So thanks for being a part of my life as well. And thanks for inviting me to be in part of your life. So let's dive into some questions from Mitch. Hi, friend. Thank you for your energetic and informative sessions. Questions. Can you give me some advice on practical or batch cooking? I understand the concept, but I'm struggling with ways to make it happen. Any tips or guidance? Interesting. Off the top, I would say that there's a really great book on batch cooking by Victor Hilese, Giellesse, Victor Hilese. He is one of the deans, a vice president, I believe, at the Culinary Institute of America. He was one of my deans when I was teaching there. A great man, a certified master chef in the ACF program, and just a hell of a cook. He has a really great book on batch cooking for the professional chef that has a lot of great lessons for anybody interested in food. So I would first suggest that. But you asked me, and what tips and advice that I have. First of all, it depends on how big of a batch, and also how complex the cooking is. So, for example, I recently cooked a dinner for about 300 people that had ratatouille on the menu. Now, ratatouille is actually a fairly complex culinary creation in terms of just the mechanisms of bringing it all together. Sure, you can just take all your vegetables and throw them in a pot and saute them, which is basically going to steam them more than anything else if you're using too much. You're not really ever going to develop flavors, and basically at the end of it, you have, okay, saute/steamed vegetable mélange. Great. That's not ratatouille to me. Ratatouille to me in batch cooking, I'll say, okay, what am I trying to get here? Well, I'm trying to get a little bit of color on the onions to really develop that sweetness. I'm trying to get the zucchini and the yellow squash to release their juices, but not to make them soggy, sodden, mush, right? I still want them to be a little al dente. The eggplant, what am I trying to do with the eggplant? Well, I want it to really suck up that olive oil and really to suck up all of the juices from the other ingredients so that it becomes sort of the binder or the mesh between them all. The tomato, the spices, whatever else I'm putting in there, what is that supposed to be? Well, I don't want the tomato to be raw. Okay, so those are sort of the considerations, right? And that's one of the things that I think in batch cooking is so important. For your finished dish, what are the considerations that you want to take into account, right? If you're just looking at, like, say, basmati rice pilaf or something like that, there's not a whole lot of considerations, right? Is it cooked properly? Is it cooked evenly? And is it seasoned evenly? Okay. But with something like ratatouille, that's more complex, or say even beef stew, et cetera, anything like this, you then have to apply your individual strategies to individual ingredients. And this is where batch cooking, I think, becomes a little more progressive and interesting, is that you're cooking your onions separate and solo, maybe even in small batches, as we did for this party of 300. How much onions did I have? I had this much onions. That's not all going to fit in one saute pan. So I did 2 batches of that, right, in order to get them exactly where I wanted them to be. And so I did that with each progressive ingredient. And then with the pan left over, a big old rondeau pan, I took more olive oil. I added in some smoked paprika. I added in a little bit of coriander. I added in some slivered almonds. And I got all of this toasted till the spices were aromatic and ebullient and beautiful. Then I threw in the tomatoes. The tomatoes then simmered down so they no longer had that raw flavor to them, but that they were still kind of juicy. And then everything else went into the pan. Everything else got mixed. And everything met together at just the right time so that within 10 minutes of simmering, bam, there it was. Everything brought to perfection in the same way as though I was cooking a one-pot, small one-pot dish for 5 or 8 people, etc. So with batch cooking, I think that's really the takeaway lesson, is really consider each ingredient and where that ingredient needs to get to, either in a sort of a 3 or 4 steps on before you mix it with the others, or whatever you need to do to get that ingredient where it needs to be, to the point where you mix them in together. And I'll apologize a little bit for some of the plane noise, but there's somebody who's trying to learn how to land a pontoon plane just by the dock down there, and I don't think they've quite gotten their nerves up to do it. And I wish them all the best. But in the meantime, they're just kind of circling the house. So apologies. Not much I can do about that other than just wish them well. Right? All right. Mitch, thanks so much for your questions. I appreciate that. And Mitch, I believe you might have sent me an email about doing a Chili's event coming up sometime soon. Maybe a different Mitch, but I'll give you credit for it. Great idea. We're going to take that in consideration, and we will do a Chili's event coming up because I love me some Chili's. And yeah, cool. Thanks, Mitch. Appreciate you. All right. From Lynn B. How do you freeze sourdough dough and sourdough starter? What do you do to prepare previously frozen sourdough in the oven or in previously frozen sourdough starter? Thanks. So I am not a baker, Lynn. Thank you very much for your question. I am not a baker. I don't have expertise in this in the way that I do with other forms of cooking. So I'll give you just some sort of light topics off the top of my head, and then also give your question over to some of the bakers on the Ruby team here. But I would freeze anything you freeze in the quantities that you are then going to need to use them, right? So if you're freezing tomato sauce, for example, don't freeze a gallon of it if what in fact you need is a pint every time you go to use it for making dinner for your family, right? You don't want to thaw out the whole gallon just to get what you need. Same thing with sourdough starter, whether they're just little balls of the starter that you do in just the quantities that you need. I would also say that because the freezing of things matters so much in terms of how the water and the molecules and proteins and all the little things interact. As water freezes, it crystallizes, and the slower that water freezes, the bigger the crystals become. Just the more voluminous they become, really. And so those crystals can damage cellular structures more the slower something is frozen. The quicker it's frozen, they kind of, they don't expand nearly as much. And so you have less crystallization, you have less damage internally to these molecules. Now, just as it's true to freeze, so you want to freeze something as quickly as possible. So if you were freezing a batch of sourdough starters in little individual bags, put them on a sheet tray, lay them out so that they have airflow over them, right? So you can freeze them very quickly. If you just put them all in a bunch and throw it into the back of the freezer, yeah, it'll freeze pretty slowly, right? So freeze as quickly as you can. And then thaw is the opposite. You want to thaw basically as slowly as you can. So pull it out of the freezer and put it right into the refrigerator. And with a little ball of sourdough starter, you're not talking about much time here, right? But that thawing process is as important as is the freezing process. And this is particularly true with things like frozen seafood, frozen meats, frozen anything, really. When you get to like frozen sauces, like tomato sauce, I'm not sure it matters so much. Yeah, you can just run that under warm water and get it done, right? Because you're going to boil it anyway. So that's really the only advice that I feel sort of qualified to give on this, but we will, again, pass along your question to folks far more expert than I. Thanks for joining us, Lynn. From Mitch, thanks for comments on batch cooking earlier. My question was not very clear. By batch cooking, I was referring to prepping and cooking ingredients in advance for the upcoming week. Okay, for only 2 people. Sorry to make that clear. Well, I'm glad I gave you such an in-depth, detailed answer for the question you didn't ask. Sorry, Mitch, but thanks for clarifying. So batch cooking, prepping and cooking ingredients, in advance. Certainly a big part of that. Here comes the street sweeper too. It's just a carnival of noises around here today. Sorry. Prepping in advance requires having, a plan, right? You don't want to just start chopping up tomatoes if none of the dishes that you're going to eat further down the line are going to have tomatoes in them. And so that menu planning is very key. And menu planning can be done with an eye towards, sort of reverse engineer the process. Plan the menu towards the batch cooking. So if you're going to make a pot of quinoa, great. You know that you're going to have steamed quinoa that night. The next 2 nights later, you can make quinoa cakes with romesco sauce, which is ridiculously delicious, by the way. And then the day later, you can have a quinoa tabbouleh salad for lunch. And then maybe a day after that, you have some crispy oven roasted quinoa. So it's crispy. You put that on top of a spinach salad with candied red onions, whatever it is. It's really looking for ways to kind of reverse engineer that creative process in a way. So think of an ingredient. You want to batch prep quinoa. And then think about all the different ways you can use quinoa and sort of make those the goalposts on your menu planning in a way, and then fill it in around that is a really fun way. And that's kind of what we do here. For instance, I just bought 2 sides of Arctic char that we're going to eat tonight off the grill. I'm going to cook the rest of it. We're a family of 4, 2 of us, one is 2 years old, one's 6 years old. So we're not going to eat 2 sides of salmon. But I know that I'm going to make salmon cakes for the boys' lunches tomorrow. And I know that I'm going to do a salmon salad at some point in the week for my wife and I for lunch. So, yeah. The other thing is with batch cooking is prepare for a little bit of tedium. And if your goal here is to save time and to be very efficient in your cooking, then just register and acknowledge the fact that, yeah, quinoa is going to show up 4 times this week, and that's okay. That's really okay. So there you go. Those are my thoughts and comments, Mitch. Thanks for coming back with the question. Appreciate you. Hey, Judith T. Nice to see you, friend. I always appreciate you when you join. Was wondering if you do a class on vinegar making, including the basics and maybe some flavor vinegars. Absolutely. We will certainly take that in consideration. That's a class I'd love to do. So as you know, Judith, I make quite a bit of my own vinegar. And for the rest of you, this is really out of convenience for me. It's more sustainability than anything. So my wife doesn't drink wine. I drink wine. And I have decided in my life that 4 glasses of wine is too much and 0 glasses is too little. You're right. So there's often times where after 2 days or maybe even 3 days, I'll have a glass of wine one night, a glass and a half the next night, a glass the next night. And then there's just this little sort of tired, I wouldn't call them dregs, but just tired wine left over, right? And even if it can be great wine. So I bought a vinegar mother, which you can source online, which is just in the Acetobacter, or you can inoculate with some live culture vinegar, something like the Bragg's, anything that says, with the mother, in quotes, for some reason. I don't know why. That's just bad graphic design. Anyway, you can inoculate it with just a little bit of that. And as I have done a Solera system, which is how they make sherry in Spain, which is every year they put in this year's grape juice. And from the bottom of these cascades of barrels, from the bottom of these barrels, they take out some of the now vinegar or the now wine, right? That's fermented. So that down the line, you still have molecules of the original wine or the original juice still in there. And there's Solera systems that are hundreds of years old. How cool is that, right? So you end up with this very blended, very mellow product. That's the product of multiple years. And that's what I do, is every time I have a little bit left over, I just pour the wine in, and then off the bottom of this single barrel that I have, I just pull some wine out. And then some of the things that I will do, and Judith, I'm kind of giving the whole class now, not the whole class, but I've got a white wine vinegar. It started. Let's see, I've got all sorts of stuff. I got white wines, I got rosés, I got white wine with an aged Chenin Blanc that I opened that I didn't really particularly care for as a wine. So, you know what? Instead of drinking wine that I didn't really like or throwing it out, I turned it into vinegar, and it's absolutely delicious. Let's see, I've got homemade cider vinegar. I got rosé wine vinegar. I got a lot of vinegars. I got more vinegars over here. This is a champagne vinegar. And for all of you, the mother, what I'm talking about is, if you can see that floating around right here. I don't know if that shows up or not, but all this stuff in the bottom too. If you can see that, that's the mother. Look at that. It looks kind of like a jellyfish floating around at the bottom, but it's actually the mother, in quotation marks. So there it is. And that is essential for vinegar. So flavored vinegars, etc. So yeah, Judy, let's get into that another time. But thanks for that and queuing that up. Appreciate you. Good to see you. From Blanca, thank you for offering office hours. Of course, may not be able to attend, but I have 2 questions. So we'll make sure that you get to know where these questions were answered when we archive this onto the YouTube page as well as onto the Ruby page. So you can just go to where the question was answered. Isn't that convenient? What tends to be the hardest obstacle to overcome as we learn to cook? Interesting question. Hardest obstacle to overcome when learning how to cook? I think probably getting out of our own way. Maybe. I think oftentimes when we're learning how to cook, we haven't developed the confidences yet to really understand and intuitively understand heat and seasoning and the machinations of cooking. And what I mean by that is, like, by now, I have cooked so much food, I have grilled so many times, for example, that I can start a fire and just in the back of my mind, just know exactly how hot it's going to be, because I'm absorbing information about the wind. I'm absorbing information about how big the canister is that I'm grilling in, how much the airflow is into it, the time that I started it, what I'm going to be grilling. And now I can just go out there and I can throw my peaches or steak or pork loin on there and I just know. I just have so much confidence in it, that I can intuit how that heat is going to work. That's the same on a stove. Like, I can look at a pan and just kind of know all the details that I put into it, meaning when I put it on, how I turned it on, how that pan has behaved in the past, etc. All of that learning just becomes intuitive. And I think when we're cooking, when I say it's to get out of our own way, is to do exactly that, is to not overthink the situation, but really just to absorb, to sit there and be a student of our own actions. I think oftentimes we might read the recipe and think that's where we're doing the learning. It's like, no. The learning is actually in the mechanics of it, more so than the recipe. Because right now I can read any recipe and just be like, okay, got it. I know exactly what they're telling me because I can picture the end result and the process, right? And I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just an experienced cook. Many of us on these office hours are. So this is not some special divine power of mine. This is just, no, I've spent 50,000 hours cooking. So again, sort of the mechanics of it, Blanca, are also having confidence and just being like, you know what, I'm just going to let that thing sit in the pan. And I'm going to accept the results of it and learn from it. I think oftentimes we're just like, oh, I got to poke it. Like, I got to turn it. I got to flip it. I got to dig it into the fire. I always got to be doing something to it. No, Blanca, you don't. You don't always have to be doing something. You know what cooks food? Heat. You know what doesn't cook food? Humans. Humans manage food and heat in the cooking process. So take yourself out of it sometimes and just be willing to make mistakes, right? I mean, if you're just absorbing information and watching things, okay, well, maybe I should have flipped that steak a little bit earlier. Or maybe I flipped it too early. Maybe I put the steak in the middle of the pan, and I use gas burners so that the heat is distributed more towards the outside of the pan. Well, maybe I put the steak right smack in the middle of the pan, and that wasn't the hot spot. Oh, okay. And maybe I should have put it a little over towards the edge, etc. It's little things like that you learn by acknowledging the information that's in front of you. So have no ego. Go into it with confidence that you are going to learn something, not confidence that it's going to be perfect. So in that way, sort of stay out of your own way and let the information flow to you. It's my best advice. Long-winded answer, but kind of a fun one. Cheers. And you had a second question, which is, when dining out, how can we continue to inspire curiosity in new, healthier dishes? I'd say with that, just explore flavors and tastes and different cuisines. To me, what's so engaging about food is not French food necessarily. Okay, fine. It's a language of food that many of us speak and sort of use to understand as our baseline. But what the French will do with a sweet potato, for example, is wickedly different than what Indonesian cooking will do with a sweet potato, or Polish cooking will do with sweet potato, or what Peruvians do with it, right? And so it's that curiosity to me of identifying maybe what are your favorite foods. Maybe it's a sweet potato, an artichoke, salmon, whatever it is, and just kind of using that as your guidepost to thread you through different cuisines, through different things, so that you're always working from a grounded standpoint, right? Like you always know that, okay, here's the commonality. The through line here is salmon. And I'm really curious to see what all these different cuisines do with it. That way you really are learning about application of flavors and of techniques and of taste profiles, etc. And not just kind of being overwhelmed with like, wow, okay, that's awesome. And Indonesian cuisine is really complicated and I don't really know where to start with what I just ate. Well, start to understand it by starting with the salmon or whatever sort of that core through line ingredient is. That's my advice to you on that. Cheers. And that doesn't have to be boring. It just means like, having that baseline commonality by which to, as your reference point, to make sense of different experiences. There you go, Blanca. Appreciate you. Thanks for being part of the Ruby family. Hey, Patty, just curious, while creating a new dish, have you ever just thrown it all out and started over? Yeah. Rarely. but mostly just because sustainability. I'm not a big fan of throwing food away. Yeah, let's say let's replace starting over, throwing it out and starting over with just admitting that it was a complete failure. And like on that level, absolutely. Yes, I do that I would say not like constantly, but I do it pretty often. But I'm also so sort of practiced in food that like I know that poaching a kiwi in coriander scented bacon fat and serving it with a cotton candy foam, just no, I'm not going to do that. It's sort of, I've reached a point where like the failures are becoming less and less because I just have a greater sensibility earned over time. And again, this is not patting myself on the back. This is just practice. But I'll tell you, I do go back and look at old notebooks, and I encourage every one of you to keep notebooks on what you do and your culinary process and just ideas that you have. In fact, I'll run and get one of these notebooks because I want to show it to you. But I'll go back and look at notebooks from my early days. And oh my gosh, I was looking the other day at this special that I proposed for a soft-shell crab dish that had 37 different ingredients in it. And it was just a disaster. And I'm not talking like a mole. Moles can have 30 ingredients in them of themselves. Indonesian sauce is the same. There's some incredibly complex layered flavors that are really wonderful. So it's not just 37 is too many. But I had like black beans and a tarragon this and a seared okra over here and braised zucchini and like cumin and coriander, and it was just like, oh my Lord, Barton, oh my Lord. And then like lime juice. And it was so much, and it was so bad. It was so terrible. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, you know what? I'm going to run to the next room real quick. I'll be right back. I want to show you this. I'm just going to mumble myself. Go. Hey again. Welcome back, Bart. Thanks. So I have these just ancient notebooks. And in them I've got all sorts of ideas. And whenever I read a cookbook or something, I always try and write down the name of the cookbook and like what page I find something on. Just so I can attribute if need be. But it's just like ideas I had, like sliced lemon marinade with garlic, EVO, and parsley, extra virgin olive oil and parsley. Cool. Caramelized pineapple butter. Okay. Artichoke mashed potatoes. I don't know about that. Pear and saffron chutney. Oh, that sounds pretty great. Sherry vinegar caramel. That's a really good one, actually. That one I ended up using in a whole lot of dishes. Take sugar, caramelize it until it's nice dark brown, then add sherry vinegar to it and reduce it down again. It was really delicious. But just having these notebooks is so fun and so key. And what's great about it is that it then also keeps you from making mistakes again in the future. But yeah. And you can begin to see a pattern and evolution of how dishes come together in your brain. And it's a bit like having a journal. Yes. I really wish I had a journal. I really wish I'd spent the time as a kid doing a journal, because I'd really like to get to know who I was back then in the ways that are slightly less malleable than memory is. But so yeah, there's that. So not a direct answer to your question, but there you go. Also, when I'm reading Food and Wine magazine or whatever else I'm reading, if there's a dish or something that I like this one. Like, I thought that was really cool. It's a tuna, let's see, this is from Italy. Cold smoked tuna carpaccio with pickled California grapes, avocado, and crispy shallots. It's like, God damn, that's a great idea, right? I'm going to want to make that someday. This is the way that we begin to formulate our own artistic sensibilities and our own sense of expression and sort of how we want to use food, how we want to use ingredients, flavor combinations, etc. So, and again, this is a long-winded answer to, have I just thrown something out? Yes, but I also have a process in order to prevent that. Thanks, Patty. Great question. From Judith L. Hi, friend. I started getting something. I'm looking at getting something to steam vegetables. What equipment do I recommend for steaming? Very simple. And just a colander and a pan that it'll fit into works just fine on the you probably already own it category. But in terms of steaming, I use a bamboo steamer, a Joyce Chen brand, I believe, bamboo steamers, and they come in small, multiple sizes. They come in multiple levels, so you can have dumplings and asparagus or something, whatever. The bamboo steamers I like because they work, but they've also worked for, I don't know how many thousands of years people have been doing this with those. And just any equipment that sticks around that long is going to be the best to me. It's sort of build a better mousetrap kind of thing. It's like, the bamboo steamer is kind of perfect. There you go. And they're made to fit easily over various size cookware that you already have. And they're like $12. So there you go. Cheers. Thanks, Judith. From Kathleen, what are some basic principles on garnishing a dish? What a great question. Okay. Flavor-wise, does it make sense? Okay. Does it make sense? Do the flavors match? Okay. Is the garnish going to confuse or be somewhat disassociated with the rest of the dish? Meaning like, okay, you have New England clam chowder and you're garnishing it with lime zest. Does it look good? Yes. Is it aromatic? Yes. Is it flavor-wise a good idea? No, it's just not, right? I mean, it's a disassociated garnish. So make sure first and foremost that the garnish actually adds something to the flavor profile, right? Even if it's just on par or parallel to me, that's not good enough. It has to have earned its place on that plate. To me, I'd rather a boring looking plate, sans garnish, than a plate where the garnish is a distraction. Another thing on garnishes is I am of the mindset that never, ever use non-functional garnishes, meaning a garnish that you can't eat or easily incorporate into a dish. Okay, so I've got this beautiful braised lamb shank. Oh, man, it's so delicious. And I'm serving it over saffron couscous, and it's just sitting proud and upright, and it's got all the vegetables around it and the braising liquid sitting at the bottom. It's just this gorgeous thing. And then I put a tree of rosemary on top of it. What the hell am I supposed to do with this rosemary? It doesn't integrate into the dish. Its flavors aren't really compatible. So the first thing I, as an eater, do, what do? I have to take my sprig of tree of rosemary off of my dish using my hands and find a place to put it. What a terrible way to start a meal, right? You're sort of asking the guests, if in a professional restaurant, you're sort of asking the guests to do something they just shouldn't have to do. Does it look pretty? Yeah, it looks great. It's kind of cool. It's sticking up in the air, but it adds nothing except labor and confusion. And now you what am I supposed to do? Put it on the tablecloth and get your tablecloth all spotted? This is just not good. So functional garnishes only, meaning something that integrates into the dish and can be used throughout the meal as well. The other thing is a garnish should be not overwhelming. Like you don't want so much parsley that you end up being like, wow, every bite there's a lot of parsley in this. A few tiny flecks of parsley in each bite off of that lamb shank with the saffron couscous dipped into the braising jus. Wow. Okay, just a little bit of freshness to bring it to the fore. Cool, right? And you want to scatter it over or evenly distribute a garnish so that it evenly distributes throughout the eating experience, right? If you just get one bite of your meal with a garnish, you're like, oh, okay, I want more of that. If it's a successful garnish, oh, I want more of it. But there is no more. So those are two really important principles, three really important principles. The other is if you are going to garnish with something, put the effort into it. Don't just hack at your parsley if you're going to put parsley on a dish, right? And just scatter it over. Don't just hack at it. Wash your leaves of parsley. Get really good parsley, first and foremost. Buy it fresh at the farmer's market. Or go to a store that has a lot of turnover. Get really fresh parsley. Taste the leaf in the store. Is it really woody? As parsley leaves can get when they're overgrown and deep, dark green. Okay, well, guess what? Find something else to use. There you go. But you had nice, young, beautiful, fresh, aromatic, ebullient parsley. Wash the leaves to make sure you're not putting sand on your dish. Dry them off very carefully, gently, to make sure they're fully dry. Roll those leaves up so that you have some real intent when you're cutting them. Use a nice big knife. Slice all the way through them as finely as you can go. And then when you go to chop against the grain of the parsley, you know what's easier to move than all of these little bits of parsley? Yourself. So stand up and now cut across the grain of the parsley, right? Holding it all so it's this nice compact little pile. So you're cutting each stroke of the knife, you're getting this really nice sliced cut to it. You're getting more and more evenly sized pieces. And then use it within a reasonable amount of time. I understand in restaurants, you got to do a pint container of it and you're going to be using it all night. I get that. But don't use it all week. Use it all night and then be done with it, right? So when you then go to sprinkle that parsley over your dish, each piece looks relatively the same, meaning you're not adding a visual distraction to your dish by like, oh, well, here's this big chunk of parsley and here's a whole bunch of tiny stuff. And well, it wasn't dried well enough. So here's a chunk of bits of parsley. It's just kind of this like parsley ball over here. No one wants any of that. So just put intent into your garnish and make sure that it looks good, because that's one of its ultimate purposes. Cool? All right. Thank you, Kathleen. Great question. And by the way, I had nightmares when I was first coming into kitchens that, this old French chef would be like, cut the parsley, cut it. And I would cut it. And then he'd come over and be like, very good. Now put it back together. And I would spend literally all night in this stress dream of having to put the parsley leaves back together. Any of you who have a psych degree might throw in the comments over there how you would address that. But anyway, thanks for the great question, Kathleen. Appreciate you. From Wilma N, what brand of knife do I use? Wilma, I use a whole lot of different brands of knives because I've been very fortunate to have been given so many knives through the years. And so I have a mishmash of a whole lot of different things. Let's see, what am I really using? So our Murphy knives, this is a carbon steel knife, and they get all patinaed like this. And it's not the best knife for everything because it can discolor. Acids, especially like cutting an apple, it will discolor them pretty quickly, etc. But they keep their blade sharp forever. I really love them. Our Murphy Knife Company is a great one. They were a family-owned company, but they were bought recently by Dexter. I have a bread knife. This is the Dexter bread knife. I really like this one. I like the handle of it. It's not the most attractive handle, but these are $20. They are sharp as, and they do the job. And I know where it is. Always, always, always have a very sharp serrated knife. It's the one knife to me that I'm willing to just trade out. They're hard to sharpen, the nastiest cuts come from dull serrated knives. So to me, like I will get rid of this knife every couple of years and just buy a new one. They're cheap enough that you can do that. I have this beautiful Japanese slicer knife that I use when I'm, all those times that I'm making carpaccio in my house, which actually is pretty often. I have a scimitar. This is sort of a meat. I do enough salmon butchering and big fish butchering. I have something like that. Again, our Murphy. I've got a cleaver, which I really love to use, and sometimes use that as just my chef's knife. Let's see, what else do I have? Boning knife from R. Murphy. So it's really kind of my go-to. And then a fillet knife from R. Murphy. And then a whole host of different paring knives, etc. Good kitchen shears. But the knives that I've seen recently that people really, really liked are the Misen brand, Misen. I've heard a lot of really good things about those, and they're pretty reasonably priced for sets. So I recommend those, or R. Murphy, and then Dexter for sort of utility knives like that. So there you go. Cool. Please comment on taste versus flavor from Jay. Wow, Jay. Hi, Jay. That's a big one. Taste versus flavor. So one might say, I think there's two ways to answer this. One is more in a social way, taste being subjective, flavor being objective. You know, you have good taste, Jay. I mean, I really love that tie that you're wearing in your picture there. I mean, it really pops with that shirt. You got really great taste, right? That's not the same with a dish. So there's sort of that social way of describing taste versus flavor. Flavor being, you know, what's the flavor of the month? Well, strawberry. You know, it's pretty defined and categorized. But in scientific terms, or sort of more technical terms, taste is one aspect of flavor. Taste is the 5 tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Right? That meaty 5th flavor you get from shiitake mushrooms, some soy sauce, the A1, it gets you kind of flavor that blooms other flavors. Parmesan is really rich in umami, fish sauce, etc. So those are the 5 tastes. Now, taste is part of flavor because flavor is the sum of taste, odors or aromas, you know, or olfactory. And in fact, about, I think 90% of our understanding of flavor actually comes from the smell of things. You know, if you hold your nose and eat food, you're getting vastly different experience from it. So flavor being taste, aroma, as well as the more chemical aspects, you know, the way that just foods interact with our mouths and how taste buds and sensory perception sort of fires off, etc. So that's a more technical way of saying that, but also just from maybe a more utilitarian way. Strawberries have a taste. Dishes have flavor. What's the flavor of the dish? Well, you're talking about sort of an integrated thing. The flavor of the dish isn't, you know, let's go back to that lamb dish I was just talking about. So lamb shank braised in a harissa spiced sauce over a saffron couscous. The tastes in that dish are saffron, harissa. You know, what's the taste of harissa? Well, it's cumin and coriander and paprika and roasted peppers and vinegar, etc. It's sort of, so you can label off all the tastes. But what's the flavor of the dish? The flavor of the dish is like this wonderful North African melange of spice and heady aromas of braised lamb and all that fat rendered into the sauce and then reduced down with the aroma and sort of steam coming off that gently sexy, seductive scent of saffron coming up, wafting through, sort of adding this nice, elegant punctuation to it. Woo! I'm describing flavor there. All right. I hope that makes sense. I hope that offered you some window. Cool. Sarah H. Is vital wheat gluten considered a whole food product? I would say, I don't know for sure, but I would say no. It seems like a derivative or a processed product of, so not the whole food. I mean, whole wheat. whole wheat berries would be the whole food. So wheat gluten would be an extracted part of that. So I can't say for sure, but I would say, judging just on the cover of that one, I'd say no. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate your question. Becca I. Hi, friend. How do you store mushrooms, onions, and potatoes? Wow. So mushrooms, I keep them in the back of the fridge, but I keep a little airflow on them. So I'll open up the package. You don't want them to get musty. You don't want them to get trapped in their own moisture, of which they are mostly moisture. That will just encourage that sliminess, etc. And I think a dulling of the flavor. You also don't want them just kind of laid out with air flowing over them all the time, because that will dehydrate them and alter their flavor. Potatoes, I store potatoes in paper bags. So I grow a lot of potatoes. I harvested about 100 pounds of potatoes this year. I keep them just in grocery bags. Excuse me, over in another part of my kitchen area in the pantry. And I use them pretty quickly. Onions, I just store on the countertops. Quite honestly, it's probably not the best place to store them. Storing them in a dark storage area that's about 55 degrees cellar temperature is best. That's what's best for potatoes as well. But unless I'm growing them, as I'm kind of trying to keep the potatoes as near to that kind of conditions as I can. Things like onions, if you're just buying these things, just buy them regularly enough. Don't, the money that you're going to save by buying 25 pounds of onions this week and holding on to them because they're 50 cents off or something, like ultimately you're going to end up throwing away more onions than the money you saved on them. So I just kind of rotate stock. And you know what the produce industry is really good at? Storing produce. So let the experts be the experts. You know what farmers are really good at doing? Storing produce. So even if you're going to the farmer's market, like let them store it in their root cellar. Buy your beets or your potatoes or your onions as you need them or for the week and go back again next week, because they're better at it than likely you are. They're better at it than I am. So thanks, Becca. I appreciate your question. Sylvia E. Hi, friend. For future consideration, love some basic information on the science of cooking, what and how ingredients are to be combined in what sequence, etc. This could come in handy. Not sure even what to ask for, but it seems like a big area. Sure. I would recommend Salt, Acid, Fat, Heat by Samran Nosrat. It's an incredible, incredible book that really, really very well defines those principles. Another one is Kenzie Alt J. Lopez, I think. He writes for the New York Times. He had one called The Food Lab, which describes a lot of this in very good detail. And then a very expensive book, just because it's out of print now, Starting with Ingredients by Eliza Green. And it's a huge book. I don't even know how many recipes, but yuca crusted flounder. Interesting. Turkish baked bluefish. Wow. I got some ideas already. Sauteed straight past the artichokes, lime, and olives. Done. Jeez. Cool. So she just runs through ingredients. Apricots. There you go. That's the first chapter I turned to. Choosing apricots, choosing dried apricots, making California dried apricots, fresh apricot varieties, apricot season, ripening and storing, choosing, baking. And then she goes through a whole lot of recipes. So these types of books are really great in that they really teach that methodology of cooking, the what, when, where, how, and why. That really leads to great learning process rather than just like, oh, that recipe was good. I can do that again. So there you go. A couple of good ones for you. All right, from Sheridan C. Hi there. How do you use Verjus Blanc or Rouge? Thanks. So use it just like wine. So Verjus is the unfermented must or juice of wine grapes, typically wine grapes. So you can have Sauvignon Blanc Verjus, which has all the flavors and acidity of Sauvignon Blanc wine, but zero alcohol. Like it was just never fermented into alcohol. So it's not a non-alcoholic wine. It was never wine. So verjus is great for people who are abstaining from alcohol for whatever reason, but still want that complexity added into food, whether you're steaming some mussels and want a white wine substitute. Verjus is perfect. Verjus comes with a little bit more sweetness, though, than wine does, because the sugars in verjus are converted during fermentation into alcohol. So you end up with a sweeter, the verjus has all those sugars still intact. So I would use a little bit less of it, but really use it just as you would wine, to deglaze pans, add a little bit to your sauteed zucchini or any sauteed vegetable dish, just to add a little bit of punctuation and acidity at the very end. So there you go. Cheers. Appreciate the question. Thanks, Sheridan. All right. Becca I. If batch cooking quinoa, bag it in quart-sized bags once cooled, date and label, put some in the fridge and some in the freezer. Great idea. Yeah, that's perfect. Especially because quinoa is kind of there's a lot of work to getting quinoa right. You have to really wash it and soak it to get all that bitter, I forget what it's called, but that bitter powder off of it. So once you go through the trouble of all that and cooking it, that's a great idea, Becca. Thanks for sharing that with us. Appreciate you. All right. Intrigued now. Oh, from Michael. Quinoa cakes. Yeah, there you go. So quinoa cakes, I typically mash. And I like to kind of overcook my quinoa a little bit so that it's just beginning to fall apart or sort of uncurl. And you can see those little curly cues of that fiber that's in there. So I'll take a good bit of that and I'll mash it until it's a paste, until it kind of gets some texture to it, a little bit of gumminess. I will then add an egg yolk or even a whole egg. You can use agua faba instead of that to kind of re-moisten it and to kind of bring it all together. I would add anything you want to in terms of flavorings, whether it's diced and sauteed peppers, roasted red peppers, onions, shallots, garlic, etc. But I tend to leave them just pretty straightforward. And then I will take chickpea flour or regular AP flour and just make the cakes, then cool them. They need to cool down so that they will form and bind a little bit. You can't just do this at room temperature, or else you'll just end up with this gummy paste. You need to let them cool down before you make the cakes, and then dip them in flour, dip them in chickpea flour, and saute them. There you go. Cool. All right, Barton, saw you on Alex vs. America. You were great. Thank you. Good on you. I appreciate you. Thank you, Carrie. Thanks for saying that. Yeah, back in September, I was competing on, well, I guess it didn't premiere until January of this year, but late last year, I filmed Alex vs. America, which is like one of Food Network's Top Chef or Iron Chef type competitions. And, well, I got outcooked. That's all there is to it. I got outcooked by some really good cooks. Didn't do as well as I would have liked to have done. I could have done better, but thank you for saying I showed well, because that's what really matters. So thank you, Gary. I appreciate you. All right, how do I prepare crab for cooking? Any suggestions on how to use crab in recipes from Marco? Marco, nice to see you again. I think you've joined us in the past. So crab comes in two forms: raw, live, or whole, cooked, or just the picked meat. It's very interesting to learn how to pick a crab. I think it's important to know how to do that for any good cook, to understand just the nature of the ingredients that they're using, right? So I recommend that, but in terms of just the ease of it, it's not the easiest thing to do. Plus, you end up with different kinds of meat. Say in a Dungeness crab, you're going to end up with claw meat. You're going to end up with leg meat. You're going to end up with lump meat. There's a lot of different types of meat in a crab for all the different types of muscles and biology they have. So you're going to end up with a lot of meat that's going to suggest maybe some different uses, and you're maybe not end up with the right quantities of all those different kinds of meat. So with crab, let the experts be the experts. Let them pick it. Let them cook it. It's always good. It's always consistent. And you get to open up a can of Dungeness crab claw cluster, whatever it is, and boom, it's the same thing, and you're able to use it right away. So cooked crab meat does not need to be cooked again. In some preparations, you should warm it back through, like if you're making a pasta with it, etc. If you're making crab cakes, whatever it is. But if you're just putting it on top of a salad, no, I like to leave it out, let it get to room temperature just a little bit. So you're not serving ice cold crab on top of something, because the flavors bloom. The sweetness comes out if it's a little, not warm, but just tepid or room temperature. The flavor and the aroma is there a little bit more. So that's one suggestion I make. And others are that any juice or liquid that's in the crab container, do not throw that away. That is pure crab flavor. So if you're making a crab pasta, the crab meat goes in at the very, very end, right on top. So it just folds in, and the heat of the pasta will warm that through. But your garlic and your shallots and your thyme that you've been sauteing in butter, you add your pasta in, all that crab juice and maybe a ladle full of pasta cooking water. Simmer that all together until it's this thick coating, rich, unctuous sauce. Boom! There you go. And then throw your crab in, etc. But do not miss the opportunity to use that crab juice or liquid, because that is pure flavor. All right, cool. How would I make my own organic ACV at home? Or do you suggest buying a good one like Bragg's? Aaron P. ACV, apple cider vinegar. Well, making a good one starts with good cider, right? And good cider comes from good apples. So I have a cider press that we have here. I have 7 apple trees on my farm here. There's hundreds of apple varieties. Each of them make very distinguished, different products. At the end of the day, are they all apple cider? Yep, they sure are. But some of them are going to be better. Crab apples and cider apples tend to have lower sweetness and much higher acidity to them, even higher tannins to them. So you're going to end up with a very different cider vinegar at the end of that process. So find an apple that you really, really like, or a couple apples that you really like. Get some cider made from them. You can just do that yourself. You can just put apples in a blender and then pass them through cheesecloth and just squeeze the crap out of them until you have your cider. It's not the most efficient way, granted, but it works. Or you could wrap them up in cheesecloth, put them in a bowl, and then use a fitting bowl to smash them down so that you can really put some weight on it, and that would smash the juice out so you can extract it. And then use some of the Bragg's, which has that mother in it, to kickstart the fermentation process, is the way that I would do that. And that would, just put it in a cool, dark place, about 55 degrees, 60 degrees, somewhere in that area, if you can maintain that. If not, it's okay. Don't let it get up to 85. Don't let it get too cold. But somewhere in that room temperature, winter room temperature zone. And it probably takes, your vinegar, it will be vinegary within a couple of weeks, but it won't be really done for about 2 months, I would say. So just try that out. And it's going to smell first like cider, and then like fermentation, like alcohol. And then it's going to smell very vinegary. And this whole time, this entire area will be a heaven for fruit flies. So keep it covered with cheesecloth. You need to let it breathe with air for that fermentation process to happen, for the conversion to vinegar, to acetic acid. But you want to keep the bugs out of there. So just be aware of those things. Cheers. Go for it, Aaron. That's Emily, MP. Go for it. I think that's an awesome project, and you learn a lot from it. And you might just learn that, man, this sucks. I'm going to go back to Bragg's. Cool. Now you know. All right, from Mitch. Vinegar aficionados might really enjoy the book House of Vinegar, The Power of Sour by Jonathan Sawyer. Interesting. Lots of making, using on his menus. Cool. Is that Jonathan Sawyer from the Treehouse restaurant in Cleveland? Wow, I'm going to check that out. Because if it is, that dude a badass. He is so good. Is there a basic knife skills class coming from Becca? But knife skills are part of the Ruby course. Most Ruby courses, the pro courses for sure. So if you're not enrolled in one of those, I'm sure that you can find some decent ones, whether it would be any of the other online culinary school offerings. I'm not sure if Ruby has just a straightforward knife class, but you could look into that on the Ruby website. So, all right, y'all. Well, it is 3 o'clock on the dot, and I have to go because kindergarten is letting out, and I gotta welcome my little beloved home. I appreciate all of you. Please approach your life with gratitude, approach cooking with gratitude and grace. Come back and see us all again. Thanks for being part of the Ruby family. Bon appetit.